זו השנה השנייה שמשרד התפוצות מקיים כנס בינלאומי למלחמה באנטישמיות, כנס שאליו מגיעים פוליטיקאים חשובים ביותר, כולל ראשי מדינות מכל העולם. התקשורת הישראלית כדרכה מתעלמת מדברים שעושה הממשלה הזאת, אבל שומר סף קיבל את הסיקור והקמנו עמדה בבנייני האומה בסמוך לאולם הכנס, וכך יצא שראיינתי חלק מבאי הכנס על הבמה וחלק בעמדה שלנו. הכנס הקודם עמד בסימן הימין האירופי, ישראל מחפשת בריתות במלחמתה באנטישמיות ובמלחמתה באנטישמיות המוסלמית בפרט, ומי שמוכן להילחם באסלאם הפוליטי באירופה ובארצות הברית זה בדרך כלל הימין. כמובן שיש משימה חשובה להפריד שם בין ידידינו לבין אויבינו, לבין אלה המתחזים לידידים, אבל הם בעצם אויבים, וטוב עשה השר עמיחי שיקלי שלקח על עצמו את המשימה החשובה הזאת, וגם עמד בלא מעט ביקורת. גם הפודקאסט הזה לקח על עצמו, למשל לראיין את תומי רובינסון, הרבה גם בימין ביקרו אותנו על זה. אני איתן בדעתי שחשוב ליצור קשרים מהסוג הזה. הדבר האחרון שישראל צריכה זה לריב עם מתנגדי ההגירה, בהגירה המוסלמית הבלתי מבוקרת לאירופה ולמקומות אחרים. אלה לא תמיד בני ברית מובהקים שלנו, אבל יש שם גם בני ברית מובהקים, וגם המגמה הזאת היא בוודאי חיובית מבחינתה של ישראל, ועלינו לעודד אותה. זה לא אומר שאין לבטים, וזה לא אומר שהבריתות האלה יש בהן גם סיכון. אנחנו יודעים מה התחבא בימין האירופי זמן רב, ועדיין יש כמובן גרעינים ושאריות של ההשקפות האנטישמיות בימין האירופי. אבל הכנס הזה עמד במידה רבה בסימן אמריקאי, מפני שלפחות באמריקה חשבנו אנחנו יכולים לסמוך לגמרי על הימין שהוא בצד שלנו, ובשנה האחרונה, שנתו הראשונה של טראמפ בקדנציה השנייה, גילינו שהאנטישמיות שוב מרימה את ראשה גם בימין האמריקאי. לפיכך הקדשנו לא מעט בכנס הזה וגם בראיונות האלה לנושא הבוער והחם הזה. מה תוכלו לראות כאן? חלק מהרעיונות שניהלתי על הבמה, רעיון שראוי לשים לב אליו עם דינש דיסוזה, רעיון עם ליאו טרל, השליח של טראמפ למלחמה באנטישמיות, ורעיון עם ראש ממשלת אוסטרליה לשעבר סקוט מוריסון, בעקבות הפיגוע הנורא בחוף בונדאי והטיפול הלקוי של ממשלת השמאל הפרוגרסיבית בראשות אנטוני אלבניזי באוסטרליה בימים אלה. יהיה לנו פרק נוסף של שיחות על הכנס הזה, בין השאר עם השר עמיחי שיקלי, ובינתיים הווה נפנה לחלק הראשון של הסיקור שלנו של הכנס.
Hello and welcome to Gatekeeper. ברוכים הבאים לשומר סף. הפרק הזה יהיה באנגלית. אם לא נוח לכם באנגלית, בווידאו יהיו לנו כתוביות. And today's guest is the esteemed Scott Morrison, 30th Prime Minister of Australia. Thanks for making the time for us here at the conference on combating anti-Semitism.
Well, it's great to be here, particularly on this very important day, and it's wonderful to be back in Jerusalem.
The Israel considered Australia to be on our side.
Yeah.
And then came Anthony Albanese. And then came Bondi Beach.
Yeah.
Are these events connected? Is the more lax, progressive atmosphere more hospitable to terrorism?
I think at a macro level, a very high level, it's unavoidable of drawing those sort of lines, I think. That said, you know, I was devastated when the government that succeeded mine ended 75 years of bipartisanship on the question of statehood for Palestine. We'd always been in favour of a two-state solution, and that two-state solution had prerequisites. It didn't involve unilateral recognition of Palestine when they hadn't satisfied any of the prerequisites, and the Albanese government changed that. And when that occurred at the same time as a rather absent response post-October 7, we saw these issues fuse. We saw the anti-Israel issue fuse with anti-Semitism anti-Semites took advantage of that, and we saw it grow and metastasize, and we saw the outcome of that in Bondi Beach.
When you look at the United States and you look at the instinctive pro-Hamas demonstrations in higher education, that could be explained to Israelis too. They've been studying Edward Said for 40 years, and this is the fruit of it. This influences society. These are the young people who go to places of influence. Is the same thing occurring in Australia? Does something like a hotbed for anti-Semitic idea exists in your universities?
I think it's not at the level of the other countries you've talked about. I think it's more superficial at the moment in those sort of progressive protest circles. But it can quickly move to what you're talking about, and I think that's the big danger warning for Australia. The most dangerous form of anti-Semitism in Australia right now is extremist radical Islam. That is where it is most likely to translate into extreme violence. Now, that said, risks occur on the right wing as well. I think those risks are probably greater in the United States than they are in Australia. But I've been disturbed by things I'm seeing in Australia on that front as well. So, sadly, we have all the ingredients in Australia, and if given the right set of circumstances, it grows and flourishes quickly.
Where would you say the heart of the public is? Like the middle Australia average person sees the news. What side is he on, do you think?
I don't think they want to be about sides, and I think that's the point. I think they want to see peace. They don't want to see the awful violence that takes place, whoever's involved, and they don't like wars. They don't want to see wars, and that's nice to aspire to that. But this is a part of the world where it's a lot more complicated, and people want simplistic answers to problems like the Middle East. And in Australia, we're a long way from here, and it's very easy to sort of just try and simplify it down to those sides.
But Bondi Beach,
yeah.
What's the public reaction?
Horrified. And
is that the great majority?
Of course it is, yeah. Horrified, sickened, saddened, traumatized. But equally, weeks before, 100,000 people were marching across the Sydney Harbour Bridge alongside people chanting "Globalise the Intifada," and that's sort of my point. I think the superficiality of the way people connect with quite serious political issues like this and get engaged in the politics of it, without, I think, fully appreciating the depth of what is involved here is very deeply troubling. I think our universities have let us down. I think the culture that's been allowed to emerge there has created, in our own institutions, as I argue today, that are actually there to protect our liberal democracy, can become the seeding grounds for those who actually want to destroy it. So, our problems in Australia are not unique to Australia. They're problems of, I think, Western liberal democracies everywhere.
You're not the Prime Minister right now, much to our regret, by the way. What can you say to Australian Jews, given that the current government is progressive with all with the whole package that comes with it? Can they feel safe with someone like Albanese in power?
I want to say yes. I can say that they are not alone, and they never will be alone in Australia. And I think the overwhelming majority of Australians are massively supportive and believe in Australia as a safe haven for Jews, and to live up to our reputation post the Second World War, where we became a place to which Holocaust survivors fled to, built lives, built great, wonderful, successful lives. The amazing thing about the Jewish community in Australia is I cannot name you of the hundreds of different ethnic communities in Australia, one that person for person has contributed more than the Jewish Australian community. I mean, talking about overachievement. And it's not all up to it's not always a result of the demands of their mothers, I suspect, either. They are a wonderfully industrious, beautiful people. And we have been the great beneficiaries of that in Australia. Sir John Monash, our greatest ever soldier, a Jewish Australian, Sir Zelman Cowen, our Governor-General times past, my dear friend Josh Frydenberg, who was my treasurer in my government and the highest-ranking Jewish Australian politician in our history. amazing people, and I haven't got into the arts and business and all the rest of it and the law. So you are not alone, and Australia will come through what I think is a dark chapter at the moment. And my disappointment is I don't believe the government really understands the connection between the policy positions they've adopted and how that can give way. I don't believe it's their view, but it creates space for the anti-Zionist, which is, Jordan Peterson says is just a sort of polite excuse for anti-Semitism, to take hold and to really capture what can often be very superficial political support, and people move on to the next fashionable protest.
In your speech at the conference, you advocated some government control or some government intervention against incitement, and you made clear that there is a border between freedom of religion and the freedom to incite. Is there a way to implement that theoretical differentiation in actual politics?
Well, I put it this way: what I'm seeking from the Islamic religious community in Australia is for them to take responsibility for their own faith in Australia, to take accountability for it, to ensure that they're doing everything they can to weed out dangerous extremist elements, radicalisation. The terrorists at Bondi Beach, one was born in Australia and raised in Australia. The other came 30 years ago. They didn't come radicalised. They were radicalised in Australia within our Islamic community. Now, other religious faiths in Australia have governance structures, they have accountabilities, they have accreditation schemes, they have training programs, their teaching is in English, there is a transparency that attaches. I don't believe that is the same for the Islamic faith in Australia. I believe that good religion is the answer to anti-Semitism, not no religion like Rabbi Sachs. And in Australia, those who of good faith in the Muslim community, I know, want this. And we need to require of all religious faiths, but particularly Islam, that they are meeting their responsibilities to protect their own adherents, because they're very vulnerable. And, the young man who became a deadly terrorist and took the lives of 15 Australians, including a 10-year-old girl, Matilda, he should have had a very different life in our country, but he grew up become a radicalised terrorist. The same thing happened when there was a man who went and slaughtered Muslims in Christchurch in their mosque. He was also radicalised in Australia. So radicalisation takes place within our own country. And I think in Australia we have to get more serious about confronting that. Sure, we can talk about challenges in immigration, and that's part of the solution. I don't disagree with that. I was Australia's toughest ever immigration minister.
Yeah.
But let's not kid ourselves. It's also when communities are established in our country, in Western democracies. Now, in many Islamic countries, they're far tougher on radicalism than we are in the West. And I don't think it should be the governments telling religions how they should be practicing. I think that goes against our principles of freedom of religion. But I do expect religious leaders to be responsible.
And the state can hold them accountable?
Yes, they can. They can, if they don't put such structures in place, if they don't have a proper accreditation programs, if they aren't disciplining and ensuring that they're giving appropriate warnings, then issues of tax deductibility, grants, various other government concessions and programs can be denied, and should be.
It seems that much of the West has just lost its immunity system. You look at places like France and or even now the United States, some preachers are openly saying, we are out to destroy the West.
Yes.
We will act by the rules for now, but later they will see.
Well, I think that's true. And I don't want to see Australia go down that road, but I think we're dangerously heading in that territory. And as I said, while the answer is in how we run our immigration and cultural policy programs, we have to be very serious about holding religious faiths to account in our country, because that's where the radicalisation is taking place. I mean, when I was Prime Minister, we had a terrible attack in Parramatta where a young boy shot a police employee. He wasn't a police officer, he was an accountant leaving the office. That young boy was radicalised in 3 months.
Wow.
we learned.
How old was he?
He was early teens,
Wow.
mid-teens, I think, from memory. So I'm trying to say, look, all of what you're saying is true. We don't want to go down that road. We want to preserve what we are as liberal democracies and not become having the state run religion in our countries. I have a religious faith. I don't want to see the state run my faith either. But I do expect the religious leaders of my faith to be taking their responsibilities seriously. And if my children in our church are being taught, dangerous ideas, well, I'd expect the pastors of my church to be doing something about that.
Do you sense a waking up in the West? There was just recently the Trump White House published a document about a security strategy worldwide.
Yeah, very good.
With an emphasis on the Indo-Pacific area. You have been to Taiwan just not long ago.
I've been to Taiwan many times since I was no longer Prime Minister, and there's similar issues there. The United States is absolutely right about this and the primacy of the threat that it presents in the Indo-Pacific, and the threat that China, in particular, the Communist Party-led regime there, presents to stability in our part of the world. So, there are many challenges to balance, but the threat of extreme Islamist anti-Semitism, radicalisation and terrorism has not gone away while we've had to deal with these other threats. There are many threats, and you've got to try and deal with them all. And governments can't choose between. We sought certainly not to try and choose between those, and tried to address them all.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in Congress that this is not a clash of civilizations. It's a clash between civilization and barbarism.
Yeah.
And he said this war is also your war.
Yeah.
Our war with Hamas is your war at home against terrorists like the Bondi Beach terrorists. Do people begin to get it, or do they think in terms of, I'd say, Edward Said, that these are the oppressed people and we must accommodate their anger?
I still think we're sleepy.
We're sleeping.
That doesn't mean we're asleep, but I certainly think there's a sleepiness about this. I think some are waking up, and sometimes they're waking up in a dangerous way as well in how they would seek to react.
Like overreact
absolutely.
violently.
And so, we want peaceful, harmonised societies. Australia has been a world leader in this. And this is what broke my heart about what happened on December 14. Australia's reputation was shredded on that score. I believe we can build it up again. I think the good nature and good faith of Australians wants to do that. But I do think we need to wake up a bit and be aware of what tries to creep in under our guard on the right, on the left, and whether it be in religion. But, these are dangerous times.
Are you going to run again?
No, I have no. That would have to be a rather extraordinary turn of events. I had my opportunity to serve, and I did it to the best of my ability. And now, post-politics, I try to avoid partisan politics where I can. Sometimes I can't, and particularly on this question of the change in policy on Israel and what happened post-October 7.
So you walked right into a trap here.
Yeah, sure. But, I can't help but speak up on this. I've done it all my life, pre, during and post-politics. I love my country, and I love my faith, and the things that I love about Australia and my faith I see here in Israel as well. And I see them also in places like Taiwan. I see them in Ukraine. And where I see that sought to be violated by autocratic, theocratic forces that deny the liberalism of Western societies, I'll do what I can.
Scott Morrison, the 30th Prime Minister of Australia, thank you very much for making the time for us.
Well, thank you for your time.
We have the pleasure now of speaking with Leo Terrell, who is the head of the task force to combat anti-Semitism in Donald Trump's DOJ. Thank you for making the time, Mr. Terrell.
Thank you very much for having me.
How is the task going so far?
It's going well. We got a lot of work to do, but we have the right president, Donald J. Trump. is committed to fighting anti-Semitism and have given me the authority to use every tool in the toolbox to fight it.
We thought for a long time now that anti-Semitism on the right was dying and that the left has been preaching, Edward Said philosophy. We were not that surprised that in Colombia the demonstrations were in favor of Hamas. What happened on the right that made it rise again?
Well, I'll tell you right now, I don't know what has happened on the right. I agree with you. There is anti-Semitism on the right. But in America, it does not stop the Trump agenda to fight anti-Semitism. It does not stop me, whether it's from the left or right, to fight anti-Semitism on the college campuses or in the local blue cities.
But there's also a problem with the central influencers in the MAGA blogosphere. We especially probably know Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. And these platforms are free speech.
Right, and you just said it. We live in a country, and I'm proud of it, of free speech. We believe in First Amendment. Talking about anti-Semitism is a right. Now, I don't agree with these people. We are in the position in the government to fight anti-Semitism. What I'm trying to tell you is whether it's from the left or the right, and the people you mentioned, it's not going to stop the Trump agenda to fight anti-Semitism.
Fight it how?
Oh, easily. Anyone who commits a crime against Jewish individuals, we sue them. We put them in jail. Criminal charges, hate crime charges. You didn't get that in the last administration. College campuses, disturbances, blocking Jewish students from going to school. No. We take away their funding. It didn't happen in the previous administration. What I'm telling you is that we fight anti-Semitism and we deter that conduct. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying that the Trump administration and my task force will take action immediately.
To conclude, where do you think the heart of the American people is?
Easy. Let me tell you right now. You know what makes it so unique? I'll answer that question. I'm a black Baptist. I'm not Jewish. Fighting anti-Semitism is not a Jewish issue. It's not an American issue. It's a Western civilization issue. We're fighting to save society. And that's why it's important that me and others, non-Jews, help the fight. That's why President Trump is in office.
Originally, the civil rights movement was a combination of many blacks and Jews fighting together. Then came the Black Power rights, and it seems like, and the university, and I'll say the whole genealogy of President Obama and the post-colonial frame of mind, and you see the Black Power rights turning against Zionism. What is going on with the general African-American population?
I'll tell you right now, I'm an African-American now, and I understand my history. I understand that Jewish Americans walked with black people in the 60s to make sure we got our rights. I remember 2 Jewish Americans who lost their lives in 1964, Scherner and Goodman, when they were killed in Mississippi. So I don't think the scenario of blacks not supporting Jews exists. I think you have divisions in all groups, but the majority of all Americans, including black Americans, support Jews getting the same rights as afforded to everyone else.
It's usually not the business of journalists, but I wish you great success in your task, Mr. Terrell. Israel is behind you.
Well, let me simply say this.
Sure.
I'm proud to have this job, and I'm committed to it for 24/7, and I can do a lot more, and I will do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
Appreciate it.
So I'm guessing there's nobody in this room who doesn't know who Dinesh is. But I'll do it anyway. Dinesh is one of the most influential conservative commentator, a successful writer and filmmaker who has taught conservatives not just to be right, but also to be effective. And that is an asset that we really need. He combines intellectual insight with the talent of a perceptive journalist for the hotspot of every single discussion, it seems, Dinesh. And I have to tell you, I was going to mention also your films, which we'll discuss later, but in the dark hours of the Russian hoax, where we thought the deep state's going to swallow Donald Trump, you were a light in the dark, and I followed you religiously, so I'm happy to be on this stage with you. Dinesh D'Souza. In preparation for this talk, I couldn't fail to notice that Wikipedia is not in love with you.
I am described as a conspiracy theorist, which, from a certain angle, I think I'll take as a compliment. But no, this Wikipedia is a good example of they masquerade as a kind of neutral source of information, of biographical information, but their editors are basically like hitmen. And you got to just look at it in that context.
It's a propaganda arm, very clearly. So they called me a Nazi and a baby hater or something. So we're on the same. I mean, not at your. I'm on the Hebrew Wikipedia, so it's not as conspicuous. I thought we would open here, since there's been discussion here of anti-Semitism in general, by differentiating left anti-Semitism and right anti-Semitism. One version was that these are two almost symmetric, parallel phenomenon, and there are those who are saying it's an entirely different thing. How would you define them?
I think for me, the phenomenon of anti-Semitism is very tricky, because it is conventionally defined as a hatred of the Jews for being Jews. I don't know how much that explains of a phenomenon. Let me give a thought experiment. If we were to take Israel, move it out of the region, and take another country, let's say India, and move it exactly into the spot where Israel is now.
It will be a little tight.
A little tight. But let's say you took a small group of Indians and you moved them here. And then there was all this, and the Indians were pro-American, and the Indians saw themselves as Western. And you get this torrent of Islamic hostility, all targeting this little India sitting right now in the Middle East. And the Indians said, we're being hated because we're Indian. Well, no. You're being hated because of your position. You're being hated because of your allies. You're being hated because of who you represent. You're being hated because of the inferiority complex of the people around you. So my point is, I think it is better to understand the phenomenon in this kind of larger context. What are the factors, by the way, some of them secular? I think Ambassador Huckabee touched on something that has not been a big theme in this conference, and that is I'll call it the transcendental motive of anti-Semitism, which I think actually deserves a little more explanation, which I'm happy to go into if you'll let me.
Please.
All right. There's a scene in Milton's Paradise Lost where Satan is observing for the first time Adam and Eve. And he notices that they're extremely beautiful, and he feels this hatred of them because of how beautiful they are. This is envy. And this is, in fact, I think, an important motive of anti-Semitism. It's maybe the most powerful secular motive that you can give. And yet, there's a second thing going on, and that is that Satan is in a campaign against God, but he can't overthrow God. And so he needs to go to plan B. And plan B is to find the things that God cares about and ruin them. So Adam and Eve have done nothing to Satan, but Satan's malice against them is a revenge scheme against the Creator himself. Apply this logic now to the Jews. There is the motive of envy, which I mentioned, but the Jews have also been God's chosen people. The mechanism by which you can say the moral law is transmitted to the world through the Jews. And if you believe that there is a world behind the world, and if you believe that there is a cosmic battle between good and evil that rages in the world, then it is not out of the question that what we are seeing in anti-Semitism is truly a kind of scheme by none other than the devil himself to torment the Jews as a form of revenge against God. This would also extend to some degree to the Christians for the same reason.
If we look at the implications of this view that you just outlined if we graft it onto politics, your work obviously fits in the larger picture of the struggle between progressive, as if I can use John Fonte's terms, transnational progressive elites and democratic sovereign nation states, and China in the background. And Israel is a part of that puzzle. In your work, Israel, it's not an isolated issue. It is part of that larger struggle between two grand narratives.
Yes. I wrote a book many years ago. This was shortly after 9/11. I was at the Hoover Institution as a scholar at the time. And the book generated a lot of controversy at Hoover because right after 9/11, the prevailing view on the right was that we were witnessing a clash of civilizations. Us against them, the West against the Islamic world, and scholars like Samuel Huntington, Bernard Lewis were part of all that. And the argument that I made was that no, because you can't speak so easily about us. We are divided in the West between a left and a right. And it is not out of the question that the left will seek to make allies with external enemies, in this case radical Islam. At the time that I first wrote about this, it seemed unbelievable because, of course, you have two groups that have completely different end goals and cannot easily inhabit each other's world. But they're united by common hatreds. Hatred of Jews, of Christians, of America, of Israel, of Western civilization. And so, if we are out of the picture, if we're defeated, and the so-called Red-Green Alliance is triumphant, then it will be the Reds against the Greens in a kind of apocalyptic scenario. But to me, this is why it makes complete sense for Jews and Christians to draw closer together. It makes complete sense for America and Israel to be close allies. And this is what makes the right-wing attacks on Israel, the right-wing attacks on the Jews, particularly disturbing and anomalous because far from being America first, they are manifestly against American interests and they are manifestly against MAGA.
As my friend Caroline Glick often says, pick the Americans who are against Israel and you'll find that generally they are against America in deed or in speech. I'm so sorry we don't have 10 minutes more, but I can't let you go before the next surprise of your career, and it's not the first one. And this one is a book about biblical archaeology that you're working on now.
Yes. I'm doing a book, and I'm also doing a series of videos for Prager University on the most important findings of biblical archaeology, which I discovered almost accidentally. I came to Israel for the first time in December of 2022. This is actually our fourth trip. But when I saw these things coming out of the ground that are authenticating the Hebrew scriptures going back 4,000 years, the first thing that occurred to me was, why isn't this being shouted from the rooftops of every synagogue and every church? And there are actually interesting reasons for that. But it also seemed to me to be very powerful evidence establishing the presence of the Jews in their ancestral homeland. And this is one way you have legitimate title deeds to a country, right? In other words, you get legitimate title deeds to a country, in my opinion, only three ways. If you look at the way the maps of the world are drawn, one way you get a country is you've been there all along, or you were there first. Number two, you can get a country by some negotiation or some treaty. And the third way, conquest. And if you think about the maps of the world, they almost always have to check one of these boxes.
Americans can buy them, as Jefferson reminded us.
Well, America's in an awkward position because the American Indians were there first. They are the original inhabitants. But the white man, you could say, got the land by conquest, right?
Yeah.
The beauty of Israel is Israel checks all the boxes. The Jews were here first. They've been here for 4,000 years. They got it by treaty from the UN after World War II. And the Jews have fought multiple wars, 1948, 1967, 1973, and held the land by conquest. So whichever box you want to check, it seems to me that in that sense Israel has the firmest claim to this land as perhaps any other country on planet Earth.
Absolutely. When is the book out?
In October.
October.
And another note about the biblical archaeology, and this is a point about how, ironically, I think we don't do enough to defend our own civilization, because Western civilization is based on two pillars, Athens and Jerusalem. This is quoting the philosopher Leo Strauss. Athens doesn't really need a defense, but Jerusalem does, because of the fact that the Bible doesn't prove things, it just declares them. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Who's speaking? Right? It's spoken in the third person, but only God was there. So who's recording this? The Bible invites a certain type of skepticism. So to me, the power of this biblical archaeology is that at the time when the world has become more secular, it's almost as if it's almost like God is sending us a message, but this time not in the thunderous language of Moses or Abraham, but through the quiet whisperers of stones.
Forensic evidence.
Yes, stone inscriptions, artifacts, writing on pottery, all this kind of stuff.
Dinesh D'Souza, thank you very much for coming here and for all the work you do. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Shikli, heads of state, distinguished guests. We are going to have a panel discussing anti-Semitism on the right. Adolf Hitler believed that his anti-Semitism was different from former kinds of anti-Semitism. He believed his was rational. Nazism as an ideology relied on a very virulent form of social Darwinism. It was not about the survival of the fittest, not even exactly about the survival of the strongest. It was about the survival of the most ruthless. That ideology cannot be reconciled with the religion that preached that all human life is sacred and that we are all created in the image of God. This makes it doubly heartbreaking to see that on the right, some are now preaching neo-Nazism in the name of Christianity. Do they need to learn from Adolf Hitler himself, who said that National Socialism and Christianity cannot long live together? The plan was first the Jews, then to eradicate not the Christians, but Christianity. And there was good reason for it, because the Christian faith continues the morality, the ethics of Judaism, and cannot be reconciled with an ideology for which ruthlessness, murderousness is the central value. So we're up for a panel discussion now. I'd ask the panelists to come up as I call their names. Caristria is an American political commentator and former producer at the Epoch Times and Newsmax. She's a rising leader at the Global Liberty Institute, and she's currently working on a book about right-wing identity politics. Please, Caris, join us on stage. It is my pleasure to call on Seth Dillon. I gather people here know what the Babylon Bee is, and if not, you will soon learn. Seth, please join us. Pastor Dunsani Washington is the founder and CEO of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, an institute dedicated to strengthening the relationship between Israel, the Jewish people, and people of African descent through education and advocacy, and also a professional musician. And James Lindsay is a leading cultural critic and intellectual who, along with Peter Boghossian and Helen Pluckrose, perpetrated some of the most vicious hoax hoaxes on faux academic postmodern journals. We'll hear about that too. I mentioned Hitler, I mentioned their Mein Kampf essay for a feminist journal, which was accepted. Imagine that. His analysis of woke pseudo-academic theories was published in Hebrew, and it was a pleasure to host him here in Tel Aviv not long ago. We shall hear those distinguished guests on the topic of right-wing anti-Semitism. So, a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. Dumsani, I'd like to start with you because one of the most worrying things is what is happening with the rift within the Christian community in the United States. And we've all seen Tucker Carlson's vicious attacks on evangelicals and other Christians. How and why did this emerge, in your opinion?
Well, in terms of why it happened with Tucker, he can only answer that. The timing of it, though, is what I can barely speak to. Tucker, for whatever his reasons are, with his anti-Semitism and his anti-Zionism and his attacks, particularly on Christian Zionists, he said that he hates people like myself and Johnny Moore. He hates Christian Zionists. Why he's doing it, he'd have to talk to Jesus about that. But what's happening, however, though, is that it is resonating with those, as Reverend Johnny Moore just said, those who are insecure, those who are looking for a reason that something is the problem, and he's tapping into that. And I'll just say this as an opening. We have said in our organization, he is probably the most dangerous anti-Semite in the United States, taking that title away from Louis Farrakhan. He is the white conservative Louis Farrakhan. If you look at their bullet points where Israel and Jews are concerned, they're identical. He's just appealing to the other side of the aisle. So that's part of what's going on with Tucker and why it's gaining traction with some.
James, we've had a previous discussion, and you have an analytical perspective on why. Why has this emerged under the large interfaith umbrella of MAGA? Suddenly, these forces who are undermining American conservatism. Why?
So before I address why specifically, I want to put a frame around what this is. Some of you will know that I have this term that I've made popular, the woke right, and I've given an analysis of this concept of woke for a decade or so. And it's a complicated philosophical topic. I tend to be a little heavy, but I think we can boil this down. What this comes to, what is woke in a practical sense, is this politic of friend and enemy, as it could be called, a friend and enemy distinction of politics, where there is a group of people who are designated as friend because they feel similarly alienated and oppressed, and they develop a grievance and an envy-based view of friends and enemies. Of course, I don't have to tell an audience in Israel at an anti-Semitism conference that sometimes there are enemies. You're all very aware that there are enemies. But there's a difference. When you believe that your enemy is your enemy because you are envious of him, because you have grievances against him, that's a different mindset. And so this politics of friend and enemy appears in the woke on the left, whether it was BLM with Black Lives Matter. If you didn't agree with them, you were a racist. So the enemies were called racists and the friends were called anti-racists. In the People's Republic of China under Mao Zedong, Mao called them very bluntly the people and the enemies of the people. And if you were the enemies of the people, you would have the people mobilized against you, or they too would become the enemies of the people. So you have this logic of hatred and destruction. The Nazis, of course, used this same idea. The fascists use the same idea. You're either with us or against us. That's what fascism means. And of course, in radical Islam, there is a concept in Arabic, the al-wara, al-bara, which is loyalty and disavowal, that metastasizes through the Muslim Brotherhood and that Bolshevik ideology of Islamism. And this idea is that the friends are the people who are united in their alienation and in their grievance against this politics, against this society that they believe cheats them, oppresses them, robs them of their opportunity. And the enemy has to be destroyed so that the friends might be able to survive. So why has this happened? The reason that this has happened is because we've been operating under this logic, thanks to the left, the woke left, then the Marxist left, for many years. We've operated under this logic, and it's contagious. We've started to adopt it ourselves. The reaction to a friend-enemy distinction, a war between tribes, red and blue, A and B, left and right, is more tribalism. We've adopted it for this reason, and what has happened is President Trump threw a monkey wrench in the entire operation. President Trump came up with MAGA, Make America Great Again, which is spread around the world as a concept that we're going to do things differently than this left-right paradigm, that we're going to step out of having the friend-enemy distinction imposed upon us by the left, and elements around the world that do not want that movement to be able to succeed have said the MAGA movement must be destroyed. And this is why. The MAGA movement, which represents people seeking truth, that represents people seeking freedom, liberty, even God, has to be destroyed, because if it's successful, the friend-enemy politics that they use to leverage from left or from right one time after another to get their opportunities will go away. So they've seeded the American right with the most divisive issue that you could possibly have, which is anti-Semitism. As Reverend Moore just said, evangelicals will not go with them, and they know this. So they can split the right into those that will and that those will not. So you have the one team and the other, and they fight no longer working together. And they can undermine President Trump's vision. They can undermine the resurgence of a true freedom-oriented politic, and they can advance their agenda back on the friend-enemy distinction. And I'll just add one last point. This distinction, if we look at loyalty and disavowal as the phrasing, friend-enemy, it doesn't matter. That was the Nazi phrasing from Carl Schmitt. Always ends up including anti-Semitism, not just because it's a useful tool to split coalitions, but because the loyalty of the Jewish people is to their God, to their memory, their community. So they will not be loyal to a regime. So when the regime declares the enemy, the Jew will say no, along with the evangelical beside him, for the same reasons. They will say no. So they become enemy by default and must be destroyed. Destroying them from a position of weakness is impossible, so they must first be dehumanized, demonized, and that's anti-Semitism. So it is the first step in a broader project of imperialism to take over those who will not submit their freedoms.
Seth, I mentioned the article you guys, Lindsay, I mentioned the article that you guys submitted to a feminist journal in which you took a chapter of Mein Kampf and you replaced Jews with men and Germans with women, and it was accepted. So obviously the erosion of standards opens the door. And for years, we've been writing, we thought that anti-Semitism is now more prominent on the left because it's mainstream there. And we thought these were only lone wolves on the right. And we had an explanation why post-colonialism was hostile to Zionism and all the rest of it. And we know the communist roots of that ideology. And suddenly we see it rise on the right, and I'm telling you, for Jews and for Israelis, this is a shock. We thought these people were our allies. We thought that the ideology which sees a world based on nation states is the ideology of the conservative right, and suddenly we see this among people who we believed to be our friends. Seth, you've been making jokes, mockery of wokeism on the left. Is this wokeism on the right? Is this a parallel phenomena or a different breed?
Well, first let me just say this is my first time in Israel, and I'm grateful to be here. I'm honored to be here. I've had a very warm welcome, although I haven't received the check yet that I was expecting for all those posts. What is it, 7,000 a post?
We Jews are very scrupulous about this, so
maybe
don't worry.
I leave tonight, so we'll have to wrap that up soon. For those who aren't familiar, I run the Babylon Bee, the world's most trusted, factually accurate news source. We publish funny fake news like The Onion or CNN. You know.
I should have said this in the introduction.
Yeah.
The right has now carried the torch of humor.
Yeah.
Took it from the left. The Onion, which I used to admire, is no longer funny. You guys are following
lists.
Yeah, well, we get more traction, more engagement, more traffic than they do now, so we've surpassed them. We're the biggest satire site in the world, which is pretty cool. But to answer your question about whether there's this wokeness on the, it's a mirror image of what was happening on the left, for sure. I think it's the same oppressed-oppressor dynamic. It's rooted in those grievances. It's seeking to scapegoat someone for your grievances and targets the Jewish people. It does often go under those euphemisms of elites or globalists or whatever, but it's often explicitly the Jews. It is a problem on the right. I've been criticized so heavily. I'm so thankful for people like James, by the way, everyone on this stage, several of the people that are here in the audience tonight who are courageous enough to speak out about this, because when you do get that pushback. You get a lot of people who are telling you, especially in conservative circles where I live and work and play, you're not supposed to challenge anyone to the right of you. You're not supposed to challenge anyone on your side.
No enemies on the right.
No enemies to the right, because we can't defeat the left if we aren't unified in fighting against the left. And I think this is the most insane idea. It's a suicidal idea, honestly, because if you have cancer, for example, right? I did a full body scan recently, like one of these diagnostic scans, and I was very glad they didn't just check the left side of my body for cancer. They checked my whole body. And we have to be willing to do that. The Babylon Bee, of course, makes fun of the left. We made fun of wokeness for many years. But when we see, these evil ideologies arising on the right, not just going unchecked, but there's pressure on you not to challenge them. Yes, we have a moral responsibility to mock that too. And so one of the ways that we confront these things is refutation, obviously. It was C.S. Lewis who said that good philosophy must exist if for no other reason than because bad philosophy needs to be answered. I think satire is necessary for the same reason. Satire ridicules bad ideas, and so that's what we do to try to challenge them.
Well, Seth, you are... One could make an argument that you are responsible for the election of Donald Trump. And here's how it goes. It's because of the Babylon Bee that was shut down by Jack Dorsey and banished from Twitter that Elon Musk decided to buy Twitter. How did that come along? And are you happy with the results?
Well, I actually bear some responsibility for the spread of anti-Semitism on Twitter, because now we have more free speech there. So apologies for that. But the answer to that isn't censorship. The answer to that is fighting back in the public discourse, in the public square. Confront bad ideas with the truth, with good ideas. The good ideas will prevail. We do need that free discourse, and not to just suppress and silence other voices. So I'm in favor of what Elon did. But what happened there was, we got suspended for doing a joke that we weren't supposed to tell. It was considered hateful conduct, and we got locked out of our account. And Elon was really upset about that because he had followed us, and he reached out to us and said, "I can't believe you guys are suspended. This humor should be allowed. We should be allowed to make jokes, especially when these are terrible ideas that have to be challenged. We have to be able to speak and confront them. Maybe I just need to buy Twitter and take care of this problem." And so 8 months later, he walks into Twitter carrying a sink saying, "Let that sink in," and unlock the Babylon Bee. So, he's restored free speech because he saw voices like ours being suppressed. So we're grateful to him.
And one might say he strategically bought Twitter and helped Donald Trump win the election. So I'm going to offer you guys a more political explanation for the rise of anti-Semitism, assuming that some people use it with no connection to the question if they believe it or not. Because one of the horrifying things is that it became useful. It became a useful tool. So there is a fight. Once we thought that MAGA and America First were one and the same. Now the American firsters in MAGA have a new interpretation saying, no, Donald Trump is also the stooge of Zionism. He's not the isolationist we thought he would be. And if you want to be an isolationist, what you do is you first target Israel, America's closest ally, and say Israel is dragging you into wars. So, Carice, you are studying the rise of identity politics on the right. Is it a belief or just a tool?
Yeah, the question of what is motivating this, I think, is very complex because all of the possible motivations are at work here. You do have the grifters that are just going along for the clicks and the trends. You do have the true ideological believers. You do have the people that are paid by foreign actors, and it's really difficult to tell who's who. I would like to say, and also, you know, it's really a pleasure to be on the stage with you, Gadi, for the second time, and I also love being the only Jewish woman in a sea of handsome Christian men. And, you know, I think that since we all identify as conservative here, we can all agree, speaking to a room full of Israelis or moderate and conservative Jews, that we are way behind on this fight. I think that Jews especially believe that we can fight this using the language and the tactics that we are using to fight it on the left. But when you are speaking to a group of MAGA or America First conservatives, since apparently that's two different things now, we do not want to be using terms like hate speech or platforming. We do not want to be advocating for censorship, as Seth said, or content moderation. And I mean, Minister Chikli, you know, I love you from the bottom of my heart, but if you are talking to a group of America First conservatives, do not bring up Germany as an example with their banning of Holocaust denial and arresting people for hate speech. If we want to address anti-Semitic tropes and we're talking to populist right-wingers, we need to get people to understand that Israel is having more babies than any other developed country in the world, that Israel still has strong national pride, that masculinity and the warrior mentality is still valued. I mean, do you really think conservatives care that Israel has the biggest gay pride parade in the Middle East? You know, so I think that we really have our work cut out for us. We need to be doing twice as much work now instead of just fighting back against the claims of apartheid and ethnic cleansing and genocide. We also need to read up about what happened in the USS Liberty, and we need to understand really what the Talmud teaches and how it's not actually hateful towards Christians. We need to be able to react to claims that, like you said, Israel's dragging us into wars, or Winston Churchill is the greatest villain in World War II. So we really need to start understanding that this fever, as Johnny Moore so aptly called it, spreads like wildfire, and we can't confront it in the same way that we have been used to doing when we confront it on the left.
Let me just explain what the reference to Churchill was, because this is a guy named Darrell Cooper, I think he calls himself Martyr Maid, on Twitter, and it's actually very illuminating. Tucker Carlson brought him on to say it's not the first time that the Jews are dragging America into wars. They also, the financiers around Churchill, they also dragged America into a war, which was a war for the Jews, and it's not clear who the villain of that war was and on which side. And this is a useful example because look, attacking the Jews and Israel ends up attacking the defenders of Western civilization. Is that an argument that would be effective in the wild space of totally free speech, say on Rumble or on X? Dumsani, your take on that?
Would it be effective for some? It depends on who the audience is, right? If you're talking about the foundations of Western civilization, if you're talking about founding documents, founding fathers, that type of thing, even the relationship with the founding fathers with the Jewish community, yeah. For those who don't know any of those things, and this is part of the vacuum that is Western culture, particularly America right now, and it shouldn't be funny, there's just not a lot of education. The anti-Semitism is raising in the church because people don't know the Bible, and anti-Westernism is rising because people don't know the foundations of the nation, that type of thing. So, yes, to Karis's point, there has to be a multi-level conversation, right? Because I think you were saying earlier, the type of anti-Semitism that's happening on the right, it's happening in intellectual circles, it's happening on social media, it's happening everywhere. So one of the things that we were saying is that often Tucker Carlson becomes the lightning rod, or the iconic figure, and for good reason, right? But the Marjorie Taylor Greens, who wanted to outlaw people who are actually lobbying Congress for a strong U.S.-Israel relationship, right? And the Steve Bannons and then Jack Posobiec said long after Tucker had kind of busted that matrix open, you had conversations being had that were not being touched on at all. And part of the reason was because of fear. We said this before as well. This is what paralleled 10 years ago on the left, when it was Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and they were saying all these anti-Israel things. The issue wasn't just them. It was that the Nancy Pelosi's and the Chuck Schumers said nothing.
Yeah.
Fast forward to now, this is exactly what's happening now. Prominent figures on the right say nothing because they're afraid of Tucker. They're afraid of, and let me go ahead and step into this, TPUSA that still platforms Tucker, if I can use that word, and says nothing about the anti-Semitic, anti-Christian stuff that he's saying. This is the same danger.
We're running out of time, but a very brief follow-up question, Dumsani, because, you know, the civil rights movement was originally in an alliance with Jews. And then came the Black Power rights and the beginning of Zionism as colonialism with the rise of Malcolm X. And this ended up with Obama. Obama is a descendant of that view. How are you doing in the black community with your message?
What people often are surprised to know is that the majority, there's no poll that you can point to that the majority of the black community is either anti-Semitic or anti-Israel. There are higher levels of it than maybe some of the other ethnic groups, but it's not a majority, never has been. However, there's been KGB level disinformation focused at the black community since the 1960s, so you would think it would be much higher than it is. So yes, to your point really quickly, yes, there's been a black-Jewish synergy that goes back to the turn of the century because the NAACP, which is the oldest civil rights organization in the world, was created by black and Jewish Americans, long before you even get to the civil rights movement of the 1960s. So that has always been the case. And oh, by the way, someone like the former mayor of Bloomberg just donates another tens of millions of dollars to HBCU medical schools because of the same mindset. That synergy continues on in the black community. We're celebrating him for that and everything. So it is not gaining traction in the black community. And I'll say this is the last part of it. What's happening on the right is not affecting the black community. It's affecting white conservative Christians, and this is part of what the whole issue is. And what's the message? The same free Palestine message that was infiltrated in our community in the 60s is now white kids saying the same thing.
Astonishing. We're running out of time, so final comments, and you can react to anything that anyone said.
I want to say something about this issue of courage, because this is really where we have a shortage, right? I think there's a lot more moral clarity on this issue than there is courage. People are terrified of someone like, challenging Tucker Carlson, if you're in our world, means that he's going to start trashing you and attacking you personally. And he's got a lot of power and influence all the way up into the administration, the highest levels. And so when you're on the wrong side of someone like that, even if you're standing for something right, there's a consequence to that. It's terrifying to be willing to take that risk. I'm really appreciative of anybody who's willing to challenge these things in the face of that risk. And instead of platforming these voices and promoting them the way that Tucker is willing to challenge them. We have Dinesh D'Souza in the room tonight, today. He's confronting these things head on.
He will be speaking here in the afternoon.
There are voices like this who are out there. We need to support them, and their courage is contagious. It will spread to others. And so the more that we speak up, the more others will follow in our steps.
And that is a personal testimony. You have been targeted by some of these people with death threats.
Many.
And others. Yeah, so the problem is not the Tucker Carlsons, it's also the Megyn Kellys.
Can I say something about that?
What?
I think that especially here in Israel, people think that this is an issue that is kind of relegated to the realm of the groypers, and they really just know the names Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens. But as people have been alluding to here, there are a lot of figures that they themselves are not necessarily anti-Semitic, but they're putting forth ideas in the right that serve as sort of a gateway drug into this conspiratorialism and also what I would call these post-constitutional ideas for America, which mirror the left in that they are neo-revolutionary and reactionary. And so I think we need to start being sensitive to other players in this. We need to really understand the doctrine of post-liberalism and what that means and how it can be used for good, but how it also can it's a very slippery slope and it can be used for evil. We need to understand the landscape of this. It's not just the groypers. We need to understand the paleo-conservatives and the libertarians and how Russia infiltrated these spaces after the Cold War and turned them very anti-Semitic. We need to understand the Christian ethno-nationalism that is brewing across the states and why that is happening. So there's a lot of elements to this, and
we need a 3-hour-long panel.
Yeah, and we need a whole day panel for this. Maybe one day there'll be a conference just about this. But it's important that we all have our antennas up to more than just the Tuckers and the Candaces.
Well, if Donald Trump is a great friend of Israel. To be honest, we're waiting to hear from him something clear about Tucker Carlson. It's time he says something. Yeah, James, please.
So just, again, on this word of courage and this idea of that being the bigger lack that Seth points out, and all the things that Karis just brought up, I'll just say that the Israel itself and the Jewish people have something to offer here that's very unique, that's very easy to step into because you live it every day, especially here in the state of Israel after October 7th. It's that courage is proof of faith, and this renewal of faith and this renewal of courage comes very naturally here. So it's a very easy example to set and to talk about and to show why things are worth standing for. Here the threat is imminent. The threat is physical. It is dangerous. In the U.S., it's insidious. But that courage shows that you care about something bigger than yourself, longer than yourself, timeless, more important than yourself. And that courage, like I said, is a proof of faith. And this is an opportunity that the Jewish people can lead in exactly the same way that they've led for, 3,000 years or something, by being who they are and showing the world what it means to live your faith and exhibit that it shows courage to do so.
Thank you very much. And if I may end with the words of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the Congress and elsewhere in the UN, we have to remain focused on the fact that this war, our war, is your war, he said to the United States and to Europe and to the Judeo-Christian civilization at large, because this is not a clash of civilizations, it is a clash between civilization and barbarism. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, James Lindsay, Pastor Sunny Washington, Caris Ria, and Seth Dillon. Thanks.